I think we can go ahead and get started. Super psyched and honored to have Isabel Carerra, Dr. Isabel Carerra, to speak with us for the keynote climate presentation here on our Climate Jam 2025, Natural and Unnatural Disasters. Isabel is a originally from Mexico, and came to the United States and started a PhD program here in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. Got her PhD in 2019 and just did so many interesting things while here at UW working at outreach programs, and such a terrific teacher. Been just so privileged to learn from her. After her PhD, she served in the College of the Environment at the UW, and then was at Stanford University for a little while, and then came back up to Seattle, and is now working with Front and Centered, which is this amazing group that has coalition members all across Washington State, and basically is like trying to argue for good climate policy, good environmental justice policy that's actually like beneficial for people, has just done such interesting stuff. For instance, Front and Centered made this map called the Environmental Health Disparities Map. This was done in coordination with both researchers at UW and with folks at Front and Centered, and basically they mapped disparities that have to do with environmental, pollutants, right, and other factors that make it not equal for everybody. Depends on where you live for what kind of health impacts you have, right? And that's actually used in Washington State for policy now, which is just an amazing thing. Even other states are starting to look at what's done in Washington for this to form their own policy and stuff on this. Isabel has also been an amazing supporter of the Climate Game Jam since the very early days. She helped out when we were in person only at the Pacific Science Center, even I think at UW too. We did some of these early pre-Climate Game Jam stuff there. Has always been a great supporter. So one of my favorite people in the world. Very happy to introduce Isabel Carerra Zemenio. Take it away.
Thank you, Dargan, and thank you to all the organizers for inviting me today. I'm super excited. I'll start sharing a little bit of the presentation today. And this presentation hopefully is interactive, hopefully to enjoy it. And if anyone has questions during the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. But yes, as Dargan mentioned, I'll talk a little bit more about myself, but I work currently for Front and Center, which is a coalition here in Washington State. And I'll share a little bit more about what I do over here. So I'm joining from Seattle, the land of the Coast Salish people. But yes, I'm originally from Mexico City. My background is kind of a weird background because I'm more in biological and environmental sciences. However, ended up working for NASA and then working for the information school at UW. So that's how I got into gaming a little bit, and then met Dargan and other friends at UW and stayed on gaming. And of course, gaming is also kind of one thing that I enjoy so much, and still collaborating with Dargan on creating games. But Front and Center is a coalition that was created in 2015 to bring especially community-based organizations across Washington State together to organize and advocate for environmental and climate justice. So we work from organizing to even advocacy, going into the Capitol in Olympia. And currently, my position is as a community education coordinator. We use games as a tool for popular education, bringing the experiences and knowledge of many communities across the state to really design games. And I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of games we have and one that we are preparing with Dargan, hopefully published soon. But I don't know if anyone remembers any of these two images. So this have been for the past 18 months. Anyone has any memories? Wants to guess? What are we seeing in these pictures? Feel free to use the chat. Yes, Ian, yes. To the right will be the Los Angeles wildfires. Anyone knows what's to the left? Hurricane flooding in Spain, you got it. Dargan, yes, in Valencia. So in Valencia in October of 2024, there was a big flooding, about 206 people died in there. And Los Angeles wildfires this year at the beginning, yeah, they were, I think, more than 30 people who died, but so many who lost their houses. And while these two flooding and wildfires are actually natural disasters, today and throughout this jam, you will be thinking about a natural and natural disasters. So anyone wants to guess? I said they are natural, but in what ways they could be considered unnatural disasters? Any guesses? There are different aspects, different countries. Human pollution, global warming, yes. Francie, human pollution, yes. Exacerbating what is the global warming and then climate change, yes. And I'll share a little bit of what's happening. But in addition, what happened is lack of planning. So in Spain, there was a lack of planning and a lack of advising. It was kind of rapid flooding, but it took about a month to clean up after the flooding. And because of how the planning of the city was done, and it affected several cities, that's why the number of people who died. In Los Angeles, we heard, about the responses and from federal to state authorities, sometimes facilitating recovery processes, sometimes not. But yes, the natural component will be climate change. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit of climate change costs. This boundary between natural and unnatural disasters are becoming more blurred as climate change intensifies. So now we have bigger hurricanes and stronger droughts or flooding, but they are connected to this pollution, not only from air, but it could be water, soil, that it's kind of putting our natural systems to the limits. And then if we add some human activities as overexploitation, for example, of the soil, or other practices of extraction of fossil fuels, then what we are creating is a perfect storm to having bigger and stronger disasters. That is what scientists and specialists are expecting for coming years, unfortunately. So my invitation today in this presentation is to reflect on these blurring lines. And when you're thinking about designing your games, how you're going to maybe highlight some of these relationships, because we are talking about systems, and systems, not just natural systems, but human, economic, social, and political systems. So I'll give some examples throughout this presentation about some games and how they are incorporating in their mechanics or in the topics some of these climate change consequences, climate change impacts. And some of them are going into promoting that collective action. I'll give some ideas maybe for you to consider it through the jam. And I hope, like, again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I found this amazing NASA video. Hopefully it plays. So what is showing are the temperatures in the planet, right? And you can see it's starting from late 19th century. So we are seeing that they are increasing. So we know that global warming is happening and then climate change. People are saying, well, this is normal, climate change is normal. Maybe the orbit is the issue, right? Well, you can see that correlation is not there necessarily. So then there have been other measurements about maybe closeness to the sun. Maybe that could be the cause of global warming. But according to scientific measurements, that is not the cause either of this raise in the global temperatures. Volcanic activity, yes, has contributed in the past to other climate change phenomena in the planet. In this case, not necessarily correlating with that increase. And if we will sum up all these three phenomena combined, we can see that combined, maybe they don't correlate directly with that increase of the global temperatures. So natural factors then, by what we have in information, might not be the first contributor to global warming and climate change. Another aspect is land use. So how we are deforesting and the construction and blooming of cities. Well, again, yes, but no, that is not the answer. Some people have been saying, well, what about ozone? Well, ozone, we have different, the good ozone is on the upper parts of our atmosphere, and the lower one is the one that it's affecting us, together with aerosols that are these particles that usually are in the air. If we will count this, three might not be kind of the correlated factor. The greenhouse gases, especially CO2 and other gases like methane, yes, that seems to be, according to scientific information, the one that goes closer to that trajectory of rising temperatures. And we know that that rapid increase in the emissions of greenhouse gases is correlated with human activities, so those human factors. So we know that the current climate change is really caused by human activities. And that is something that I think that it's important to maybe highlight when we are talking about climate change, especially in game design. All combined, yes, are contributing to that climate change. We just wanted to show you those graphs to see how it's a very, very complex problem, climate change, but human factors are the ones that are really contributing to that phenomenon. So we have a lot of games that are talking about climate change. One of my favorites is Evolution, Climate, because then you can see how the different animals are adapting to the changing environments, right? That's a great board game. Then we have in the video games, Terra Nil, where we have to kind of adapt our kind of communities to the different environments in Earth. And then there are other educational games. One of my favorites is the Story of a City, how we are building cities together, and there's a little bit of decision making. Now, all of these games, I mean, if you have played them, they are very fun. However, they are just maybe pointing to certain parts of those graphs, not the sum of what we saw, like that human activities plus the natural forces. So although they are great talking about climate change, might not be focusing too much on that human factors. And when we talk about human factors, it's not just about the pollution. We have to think about the systems that kind of incentivize that pollution. And I'll talk more in a little bit about that. But again, the other aspect about climate change is that climate change does not affect everyone equally. Of course, depending on the planet, maybe we will be, and even in the States, for example, we might be more exposed to hurricanes if we live closer to the coast, or flooding or droughts. But also it has to do with socioeconomic components. So here, if you want to take a look into that report that gave rise to the environmental health disparities map that Dargan mentioned at the beginning, there are different factors that will impact or will tell us what is our risk. So when we are talking about climate change, there's a term called frontline communities. These are communities that are hit first and worst by climate change. And they are exacerbated, like why this happens is because there are socioeconomic and maybe other political components that might be exacerbating other socioeconomic and environmental health disparities. And I'll give some examples. So, for example, here in Washington State, some of the factors that will increase the vulnerability of a community to then become a frontline community will be, for example, lower income. It's not the same facing a heat wave when you have AC and you can pay for AC than when you don't have the money, right? Unfortunately, there are certain policies and that have been historically marginalizing certain communities, so people of color, so Black, Indigenous, immigrants and refugees might be at a higher vulnerability and therefore a risk because of certain policies. I'll mention some examples in the next slide. Persistent conditions, health conditions, asthma being one of those related with pollution, or maybe cardiovascular diseases might increase our vulnerability. And language, for example, I come from Mexico, I speak Spanish, and if I wouldn't speak English and I come here to the United States and there's maybe a message, an alert message that there's a heat wave or there's a flooding coming and I don't understand English, maybe I wouldn't know that that is happening. So that will increase my vulnerability. In addition, where we live and where we work affect that that risk, right? If we some vulnerability and exposure. It's not the same living by an industrial complex than living in a neighborhood that has a lot of tree canopies and green spaces. The air quality is much different. And this risk, if we add the hazards of fire, floods, heat droughts, and more, then we are at a higher risk. This is why we call frontline communities kind of a contextual concept. Because here in the United States might be people of color, lower income, LGBTQI+, but in other countries might be women, or might be refugees, or might be, it depends also in the country, in the part of even the United States you live. Some communities might be at a higher vulnerability. So when we talk about frontline communities, we are talking about those who have a higher risk to be impacted by climate change. And it's very important to understand that this is contextual. And although there's a racial component there, it's not the only component. And that is very important because current policies in the United States claim that there's some racism embedded into this concept. So climate justice then is a movement, it's an intersectional movement, roots in environmental justice, which is the recognition of the unfair exposure to pollution. But then here what we are seeing is unfair exposure to climate hazards. The unfair access or sometimes lack of access to resources to invest in mitigation. That means how much emissions we are giving, like those greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. If we can mitigate those activities, if we can have new technologies, for example, that reduce our carbon footprint, then we are doing mitigation. So if we don't have the resources to do activities for mitigation, that is a climate injustice. Or adaptation, for example, when there's a flooding, that recuperation time or preparing in the face of a hazard, which mitigation and adaptation combined talk about climate resilience. So when we don't have the same climate resilience in between communities, that is when we're talking about climate injustices. And this is usually at a regional, a global scale versus environmental justice that tends to be more localized. And it is connected to extractive practices. So our current economy is based on kind of the extraction of trees and fossil fuels and all natural resources, right? But also the exploitation of human labor. And then we all are part of the system because we have to buy, and sometimes we think we have to buy the new, I don't know, phone, the smartphone that is in the market. Well, that consumerism is fueling a little bit this climate injustices. And if we think about histories of colonialism and imperialism, currently militarism, and then the power, not just political, but also the wealth in a few versus in the many, these are factors that are contributing to climate injustices. So for example, here I have a map of redlining that is practiced here in the United States. For example, Seattle, I here have a map of Spokane. And current phenomena will be sacrifice zones, similar to the sacrifice zones, who are forced to live where there's more pollution, or where there's a higher risk to be affected, for example, by sea level rising. So that is something that is part of these considerations. Now, here I have a map of what it's called geopolitically, the global north and the global south. Why? Because there's a lot of friction right now with climate justice, because global north, those are what are considered the industrialized countries, and in some point they were colonizers, have been developing their economies at the expense of the global south. And the global south has not that many resources to invest in mitigation and adaptation or green technologies, for example. So in the COPs, especially in the climate conversations for the parties, that is where we see the frictions between the countries of the global north and the global south. But even who has the money and the resources to measure climate change and give us that information that we saw in the graphics? It usually comes from the global north. So we see so many disparities. So considering these as part of climate change, I want to propose for this game jam to start thinking about how to integrate all these complexities in that game design and the stories that you want to tell through your games. So one of my favorite games that really goes into the complexities of injustices, and also in political, economical, social, is Daybreak. So if you want to look into the mechanics of Daybreak, very good ones. You can see those cards that are looking into collective action as well, not just individual action. That is one that is great. Another one more in kind of the virtual and the video games is the Eco, where people have to collaborate to build together kind of more sustainable cities. But here a quote that hopefully it's for reflection. What if you could experience being a disaster responder or a frontline community leader or a policymaker faced with a hard trade-off? The problem with the first games is that there are trade-offs, but they are not deep trade-offs. Games are that opportunity to kind of increase empathy, to learn from the experience of others, to maybe explore scenarios, and then to practice what is decision making with those hard trade-offs. What if I have limited resources and I have to decide between investing, between health access, and maybe wind turbines? Or what are the consequences of investing only in solar panels? Because there are environmental consequences in there. Who can afford solar panels? And I see that Stephanie is saying the designer of Daybreak will be leading our next keynote. So great if you want to ask questions about the trade-offs and complexities. But again, games are these stories. It's a storytelling tool where you can explore the complexities of climate change. And I will invite people to think about embedding those components of climate justice or injustices that happen, right? Because as we know, climate change is a very complex problem that has to do with political power, economic, and social components. Now, this is one of my favorite games, Catan, one of those traditional games, new energy, right? But this game comes in a little bit on what I will call the games that proclaim that we have to save the planet. And when we say save the planet, what are we talking about? Save the planet for myself, save the planet for my country, save the planet for my community, save the planet for maybe the plants and the animals. It is a tricky word. So there are certain mechanics in games that have these lines of hero quests, right? We are heroes that we are going to save the planet and we are going to do something to save a community. Well, that takes us into a slippery slope because this tends to go into saviorism. So what it's called white savior complex is that Destiny Manifest, where we are dividing societies in those who have to be saved and those who will be the saviors, those who have the solutions and those who are at the mercy of those who have the solutions. So we are giving that power dynamics, kind of too much power to those who might have the solutions. That, I would say, it's not the best mechanic. Of course, it's a valid mechanic, but I'm just, if we're going to talk about climate justice, we might want to focus on these tricky mechanics that might be good to reflect on. Another one, and this is where Catan New Energies, for example, falls into, is those tech-based or market-based solutions, where the problem with the tech-based and market-based solutions is that tend to perpetuate that dependency, right? I depend either on whoever is creating the tech or maybe on having the money, and they propose false solutions. So a false solution is one where you have to ask, who has the power? Who owns the solution? Is it a company? Is it a government? Is it the collective, the community? Who owns the solution? Second, is it solving a root problem of climate injustices, or is just a band-aid? So if we are going to do hydrogen, for example, or EVs, electrical vehicles, great solutions. Electrical vehicles, unfortunately, are not accessible to all. Batteries kind of have a limited time and then contribute to pollution. And extraction of the metals for building those batteries have contributed to colonialism, militarism in other parts of the country and the world. And of course, extra pollution in those communities. So we have to think about those trade-offs when we're thinking about the mechanics of the games. And if you want to learn more, because maybe you want to explore in your games climate false solutions, here's a great resource. You have a lot of videos and it's in several languages. So this is a great resource if you want to go into what is the problem with tech-based and market-based. So solar panels are great, but till a certain extent. And now, universal solutions are not realistic. So some solutions are proposed, for example, from the global north or from the United States, but the implementation in countries, for example, in South America or Africa, will be impossible. Will be either too expensive, there's no space. So universal solutions are not realistic. We have to contextualize or create mechanics that allow us to think about how to adapt those solutions. So universalism, target universalism might not be the best mechanic for designing games if you want to include that climate justice component. Now, I said kind of what might not work too well, what might work well. So principles of justice-centered game design propose that co-creation. So it's not just inviting people to hear their stories of how they have suffered with climate hazards, but really asking about their ideas on how to solve maybe the problems they see in their communities, in frontline communities, right? Or maybe linking that economic, social, and political connections to climate change. So making evident that there are all these components connected to climate change. Or maybe avoiding that disaster voyeurism where, hey, you know, there's a community who will die after this. So what can you do is promoting agency, promoting that kind of solution, community solutions for that game, not just looking into the trauma or the bad. Promoting empathy and exploration of the root causes. Maybe we don't face the same hazards or the same problems, but games could be that way of promoting empathy, putting ourselves in positions that maybe we haven't been, so exploring those, and then not just exploring the symptoms of climate change. Having inclusive or being inclusive of perspectives and experiences. Kind of informing yourself about what's happening, for example, in other countries. Why a solution might not be good, because many of your games might be available in those countries, and people might not play them because it's not congruent with maybe either their cultures or maybe their experiences. And then one good the best thing you can do is encouraging collective action, like that collective ideation and something that they can take after playing the game. So a game can't fix climate change, but it can prepare a generation to fight for justice, collaborate, and reimagine what is possible. So for example, here you see it's in one of the events front and center, we are playing the Just Transition Loteria. So the Just Transition Loteria is a Mexican game similar to bingo. And we collaborated with community members to define those concepts. And we included some cards that are false solutions. So when we are singing the cards, sometimes there will come a false solution like the net zero economy. You can look into that source I shared of why net zero, it's a false solution. But we then promote discussion about why net zero is a false solution, right? And here we have not Cards Against Humanity, but Cards for Resilience. So another game from Front and Center that was created in community that proposes like thinking about how bringing resiliency to our communities and from our communities. So those conversations, especially across communities. So as you can see, we're taking ideations or ideas from other games and incorporating it in our own games. So the idea as game designers is that we don't have just to explore the disasters and, you know, what was happening and what's the wrong, but we want to inspire to create new futures, new, more just futures. So when designing your games, you can think about who are you inviting to the table and in what capacity to design a game with you. So in many cases, we invite, and I have been collaborating with Dargan in a transportation justice game. We invited members of the community to give us our feedback. Like there was a initial ideation and we gathered some feedback. what story or stories are you telling? Are you perpetuating kind of savior complex or dependencies, or it's more like let's promote collective action? What systems are you reinforcing or disrupting? Are you promoting liberation? Or are you just saying, hey, consumerism is the best? You have to buy more to solve climate change. What futures would you like to help designing or to inspire others to design? And then how will you help people to prepare, connect, and act towards climate change? So I think that these questions, if you can think about those throughout the Climate Jam as you are designing your games, that could lead you into that climate justice components. Now, want to thank everyone. I tried to make it short so we have a space if there are some questions. But if you want to learn more about what we are doing at Front and Centered, you can check that QR code. Our website is very easy. It's frontandcentered.org. And you can see how Front and Center, we are working as a collective towards what we call a grassroots just transition. But a just transition is a conversation for another time, because that is a very, very good framework, but a complex one. But hopefully you enjoyed this presentation, thinking a little bit more about how climate change relates to climate justice. And I'm ready for all your questions and comments. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Isabel. That was terrific. All right. Yeah, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself too if you have questions. That definitely would be welcome. I have a few. I, was wondering, what do you think are the kind of critical game mechanics that are associated with a more justice-based way of thinking? Yeah.
I personally love co-op.
Yeah.
So even pandemic, right? Where
Yep.
either all of you work together or then everyone loses. That is something that I love, like that co-op, because that is what we need to solve climate change, to go beyond our differences and work together and find common and shared goals and actions. So I think that that is one of the mechanics I love. It's hard to implement, and sometimes people get frustrated. And it's hard to get it right? Because sometimes the co-op games have so many complex mechanics. So I will say you have like about 5 weeks to finalize the game. Yes, don't try to put everything in there. Just try to kind of, if cooperation will be the main mechanic you want to use, then make it simple, and then just decide a specific ways in which people will collaborate. Not a dice, and then you have to have like triple rounds, and then they act and collect, and because then might be too complex for the time you have for designing a game. But co-op, my favorite. I enjoy those.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like those games are really fun too. Some of the more like hyper competitive ones, like we tried to play Monopoly with my family the other day for their first time they'd ever played it, and you just want to like fight after playing that. It's just sort of the nature of that type of thing, right? But competitive stuff, it just feels good when you're playing with others and working together on a shared goal. Do you think you can do that with like single player video games? I guess you can always have like sort of non-player characters that you're cooperating with. Even in a single player, right? Some of it's about feel, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that is where we can think about, for example, why do we recycle or why do we compost, right? We are doing it at an individual level, but all the actions combined have something. So you can have badges. or rewards, right? To kind of say, hey, collectively, this is what it happens. For example, in Daybreak, where depending on the total emissions, the temperature starts increasing, right? But it's the actions of everyone. So you can go into that individual component and maybe just foster those behaviors that will help maybe, increase the adaptation capacity or the climate resilience of a community. Doesn't have to be everything all together by a group. Someone might want to look into how to bring people into giving more power in the decision making, right? We think about climate change and we only think about nature and disasters, but some disasters, as we said, had to do with decision making. Well, what if you will explore what is a decision making in different ways? So participatory budgeting, for example, where yes, we come with our ideas, but we will have to come to a consensus, or any other activity that really, as a sum of many individual activities, you can obtain or make a change.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool idea. Like the idea of consensus, right? Like something where every single party at the table has to agree, right? In order to move forward on something, right? It's sort of the opposite of like taken over by force, right? It's coming to something that where everybody can, you know, really understand where everyone else is coming from, right? And why, and then come to that like uh, mutually, agreed upon solution. I wonder if y'all can think about ways to incorporate that into a game. Thanks for the questions and comments in the chat here. Jason was saying you can play a single player game with other people. That's a great point. Yeah, or with a chat in a streaming context. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the ability to communicate more than just purely on the screen is like such an important part, right? That's sort of the fun of board games too, right? Is to be able to. It's not just about the game; it's about that experience with other people, right?
And Dargan, maybe people can give likes, right? As we do in social media, that sometimes you do likes. So
Yeah,
you could have like maybe for those kind of single player games where other people could give you like oh yes, or I vote for you, or something where you get recognition and there's interaction also. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be just chatting.
yeah. Cool. Here's a great question from Ian. What would be your recommendation for finding easily digestible climate solution or climate change research?
So climate change research, I mean, I like the NASA websites because they have like very concise, and NOAA used to have some also very, very concise because they were into the outreach component, right? There are, of course, the very heavy ones, but why I like NASA because they have also media and they tell you how you could share that kind of in a little bit of concise way of sharing that information. So you will find a lot of resources there. Now, the issue there is that, again, sometimes it comes with a more Western scientific approach. And then it's great. I mean, if you want to rely on that scientific, but you have also the experience of people, for example, farm workers. If we could lean into direct or live experience or traditional ecological knowledge, right? Those from indigenous communities that have been passed throughout, generations based on observation. So could be a game where you have to observe and take tracks. By the way, NASA has a kind of a citizen science platform called Globe. So Globe is great because you can get some ideas if you want for your mechanics of your game on how to implement those. But it incorporates also worldwide connection between schools and students and teachers. So people in Uganda can connect with people in Belize and share about how their experience maybe flooding from where they are living. So it's contextual, right? So maybe try to promote those. And sorry, my cat is very angry. She's vocal. I don't know if you are hearing her, but that could be a way where you can also incorporate lived experience, or you can have a card where people could say, "Hey, have you experienced a heat wave, and what was your experience and how you dealt with it?" It doesn't have to be everything scientific. It could be also the day-to-day experience that people have facing climate change.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Wanted to say also that like anything that says NASA on it, that's public domain. So all of those resources can actually be included in your games, even if you're planning on selling it. Um, just a shout out to the fantastic Earth scientists who've been working for NASA. They're on having hard times now. A lot of those folks have been let go. Many of the graduates from UW, have lost their jobs in recent weeks because NASA might not be doing Earth science for long. So, Isabel, I found it really fascinating what you were saying about um, disaster voyeurism, you know? And I feel like that this is a fine line to walk when doing any kind of communication about, um, you know, natural disasters, right? And I wonder if you could talk more about that, and then your solution, with showing agency as well.
Yeah, well, so sometimes certain communities and individuals might have past a really traumatic experience with a disaster, and a game can exacerbate those if we are looking into kind of, oh, we saw in the news that this happens, for example, Spain, right? And use also those cars. And if we lean into just the trauma and just the bad things about that without looking into the recovery, like what did the community did to kind of lean into their recovery, and not just the government giving money, but really people offering that hope, then we can avoid and kind of not going into the gloom of it, because that is the risk, right? If many people are right now experiencing eco anxiety, that means we hear so much about climate change, and then we add in our game like all these disasters, right? Natural disasters and unnatural disasters. Well, that can exacerbate anxiety. So a solution is to lean into that recovery. What is bringing hope? Because it's not the end, like the disaster is not the end. And we don't have to be as explicit in kind of what is the scenario of a disaster, especially if we are going to do video games. Those kind of tend to be more explicit. So being a little bit more careful, especially respectful of the trauma of many communities who might have gone through that experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like what you're saying about empathy too, right? Games are so great for building empathy. I mean, you just immediately feel like you're that character, right? So to understand their story, right? I feel like so many, so-called natural disasters. If you dig into it, there's a lot of reasons that they happened the way they did, right? And then we hardly ever hear the stories about the recovery afterwards, right? If you look just at news sources, right, it's so much just this disaster happened there, right? But then for so long after, people are recovering and often doing that in really amazing, community based ways too, right? Like just with some of the disaster causes, I think about Hurricane Katrina, for instance, in New Orleans, right? So at Hurricane Katrina, we hear about the Superdome had so many folks in it, right? So New Orleans had more people without a car than could fit in the Superdome, and they were told to go to the Superdome to evacuate, right? So how is that ever not going to be a disaster, right? If you're not able to get out of town with your own private vehicle, right? And if you're told to go to the place, people do, and they show up and there's not enough room for them, right? So oftentimes it's those systems, right, make themselves clear. Um, yeah. But I love too showing the agency and showing the really great work that's being done to for communities to keep everybody safe, right? That's happening everywhere. Um, and we gotta highlight those stories now more than ever, I think. Yeah. I was wondering too, what um, what sort of the essence of um, justice in terms of like something that could be put in a game, um, is it sort of about like I know um, in a lot of the materials that you've sent us to um, talk about like unfair allocation of burdens, right, and unfair allocation of benefits, right? Um, so I wonder if that sort of thing could be incorporated in a game as well, right? Like what are the extra burdens that are put on different communities, right? Um,
Yeah,
uh,
because if we think about, for example, here in Seattle, we have people in South Seattle. South Seattle, you have a lot of industry, right? And it's a lot of paved surfaces, not that much tree canopy, and on top you have all these factories kind of polluting. So then what happens is you have horrible air quality. There's no way that it is filtered by trees. And then when you have a heat wave or a wildfire smoke, then it goes kind of beyond. But of course, it's the area where rents are cheap,
yeah.
right? So you can see the connection. Now, in other parts of the world, even in the United States, we have what are called sacrifice zones. So those who might need to be in a mining, or those who, for example, I was working in Chiapas, which is in the border with Guatemala, because indigenous communities were evicted from their ancestral lands in a jungle, in the Lacandon jungle, because it was for the creation of the California carbon market.
Mm.
So yeah, but you're evicting these people without any compensation. Sometimes there was abuse of authority for something that will kind of limit pollution in the United States. So those are called sacrifice zones, or those who might need to live close to wastelands because someone has to do it. In Mexico, we have people who actually go to waste and they recycle, like they separate all, and that there's an economy based on that. And they live close to where the waste is divided. And unfortunately, that is the system that's the case. But again, does it need to be like that? And what if in a game, we will give them the opportunity to say, hey, if you will have the power to recreate this, what would you do? What would you do different? Because sometimes these communities never get that question. They are never asked, and they have great solutions, but they never get to the decision-making table, and that's why they are not considered. So you can explore some of it without using or abusing the stories of other communities. Because
Yeah.
if it's not your culture, if it's not your community, well, try to inform yourself, but it's just to avoid those stereotypes, right? And to avoid coming with, oh, well, yeah, I don't know. There are many stereotypes, and that's a fine line where yes, you want to lift those voices, but that's why I was saying, well, if you can invite people from the community to work with you, that is different than just reading in the news or reading a story and then just deciding to incorporate that into your game, because then there's a risk of falling into those stereotypes.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, and we're working in a medium that people love, right? It's not like we're talking about scientific or yeah, something super boring. Like a lot of times, community members really will want to help with games. It's exciting and fun for sure. Um, I wanted to ask, maybe just as like a final thing, um, what are your favorite aspects of like a future uh, regenerative economy? Like what's something that's kind of like a future utopia that you think could maybe be incorporated in somebody's game?
I
Yeah.
would love to see how people are using that radical imagination, kind of Afrofuturism, Latino futurism, like those aspects where we are seeing communities again not divided by, but coming together for. So, and where we are considering also non-humans or more than humans, where it's not just human centered, but it's kind of really communities of humans, non-humans, and more than humans together working. I would love to see also games in a future where people with disabilities have more agency, where systems are designed for them. Not that, especially their climate resilience is lower because the systems and the solutions we have are not inclusive. So those spaces where people, we are kind of favoring well-being, el buen vivir. It's not at the expense and it's not with a dollar sign. It is about really well-being, and that is a priority over money and over power. Um, might be sounding utopian, but I think we can do it. There are examples that are happening and that are working on that, and where people feel that they have a say on what is happening in their community, what it's called the deep democracy, right? It's not just the representatives who decide for them or someone with power who decide for them, but everyone in the community has a say, even by age. Like even the youth have agency in what's happening in the community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if this sort of stuff passes in like a policy realm, people will love it, and then that would stick, unlike some of these, you know, false solutions policies. Gabrielle says, "What do you mean by non-humans or and more than humans?"
So this is one of those terms that depending on your country and part of the country you are. So non-humans or more than humans, sometimes it's people use it exchangeably. Sometimes people differentiate because non-humans can incorporate rocks, could incorporate other things that are non-living organisms, right? So non-humans could incorporate non-living and living organisms. When we are thinking about an ecosystem, it's not just the plants and the animals, but also the substrate, the water,
Yeah, the
right? That
river,
is, yeah.
the
And that's
mountains.
why
Yeah,
we talk about the rights of the rivers, of the oceans, right? So you're talking about that. Now, more than humans, there's more kind of that emphasis in living organisms. So that could be plants, animals, fungi. We never talk about fungi, bacteria, right? So it's just kind of in that justice central language that we are considering these concepts. And you can explore that also in your games. The rights of the river, the rights of the forest, right? Rights of nature. That is something that is coming more common. And when we're considering that the water and nature have rights, it's not just about human rights, but also the rights of nature. And usually they shouldn't be kind of encountering or opposite. They should be in synergy. That is the ideal of that regenerative kind of economy or a utopian future.
I love it. I want to live there. Yeah. Um, Cool. Well, I think we're, coming up on time here. So thank you so much for being here with us on a Friday night. Yeah, if it's night, maybe not everybody is at night, but yeah, thank you all for being here. Thanks so much, Isabel, for uh, giving this. We cannot wait to see what y'all are going to come up with during ideation week here. Um, yeah, I think we'll be checking in the Discord pretty soon here. Yeah, to see what y'all have been up to.